Okay, so now the next part we're going to talk about is dividends. Now the good thing about dividends is we've talked about dividends already. We've talked about dividends in every chapter. We've done the journal entries for dividends in every chapter. The only thing we really haven't talked about with dividends is how a company declares them. Right? Now the one thing you want to remember is dividends are never required by a company. And for example, Google, which we just looked up when we went to Yahoo, Google has never paid a dividend. You are never required to pay a dividend until you say you're going to pay one. And then once you say you're going to pay one, then you're legally required to pay one. So as soon as you say you're going to pay one, that's when you create the liability. So for example, let me get this erased off the board. It was not erasing very good. So for example, as soon as we say we're going to pay, a company might say on November 1st, we're going to pay a dividend to everyone that owns our stock on 12/15, and we're going to pay it on January 31st. Right? So it's declared by the board of directors. The board of directors is who decides it's going to pay it. Once they say it, we create the liability, and you have to make sure you have enough retained earnings, because that's where dividends come from. If you do not have enough retained earnings, you cannot pay a cash dividend. And as soon as we go over these journal entries, we'll talk about the other kinds of dividends you can pay if you don't have enough money. So as soon as I said I'm going to pay a dividend on November 1st, this is the journal entry you guys have seen. Dividends declared, dividends payable. As soon as the company declares one. So November 1st, I said I'm going to pay one. That means I have to say I'm going to pay it. Why would I say on November 1st that I'm going to pay a dividend to everyone that owns my stock on December 15th and then not pay it until January 31st?
So if people know that they're going to pay it on the 31st, the company doesn't want them buying their stock on the 30th and selling it on the 1st.
Okay, right. So they do have to hang on to the stock until the 31st to get it. Why am I saying it on November 1st, but then everyone who owns it as of December 15th? So they have 6 weeks to go and buy it. Why am I doing that? To encourage people to go buy my stock. So the date that I say it, November 1st, is called the date of declaration. All right? So that's called the date of declaration. The date that you have to own it by is called the date of record. There is no journal entry on the date of record. That's just the date you have to own it by. And then January 31st is the date of payment. And all you're going to do on the date of payment is dividends payable and cash. So just like I said, you've done those journal entries. So there's nothing with cash and dividends that you haven't done before. It's just what are the date of declaration, date of record, and date of payment. And notice in this example, the date of payment is in a new year. Why would they do that? Because then the cash comes out in a new year. They recognize it, they put the liability in one year, and they put the payment in the next. You don't have to do that, but that's something that they could. So there's your date of declaration. Notice how big that one is, and then when they go ahead and pay it. And then remember how we close it out. Just an example, going back to closing entries, dividends is a temporary account, and we close it into retained earnings because it decreases retained earnings. That's what I meant by making sure you have enough retained earnings in order to do a dividend. All right, so what happens if you don't have enough cash? What's your option? Huh?
You shouldn't offer a dividend.
Well, you can't offer a cash dividend, but one of the reasons companies do dividends is to reward their shareholders. So if you don't have enough cash, you have a couple other ways to give back to your shareholders. One of them is a stock dividend. All right, now you have to have enough stock in order to give a stock dividend, because in order to give a stock dividend, you have to have your own stock, which means you have to have treasury stock. So you have to own enough stock. So you distribute additional shares of stock to stockholders. The thing with stockholders is all the stockholders' percentages remain the same. But even though your percentage remains the same, your number of shares increases. All right, so stockholders' equity doesn't change, par value doesn't change. But what happens is the market price per share goes down, and you're hopefully demonstrating that you're committing to the shareholders during difficult cash times. So I don't have cash, but I'm going to give you stock. All right, so you're trying to give that. There's two different types of stock dividends. There's small and there is large. And notice there's a small overlap. All right, stock dividend less than 25% and a stock dividend greater than 25%. So it really doesn't tell you what to do if there is one that is equal to 25%. So the good news for you guys is that usually when you're doing it, we're either going to tell you it's small or we're going to tell you it's large. All right, we're not going to make you guess. And usually a large stock dividend is like 100%. We're going to tell you it's a large dividend, it's 100%. Which means if you have 10 shares of stock, you're getting 10 shares of stock. That's what 100% means. So if it's a small stock dividend, you're going to record it at market. Meaning the company is going to take the number of shares that are issued and they're going to record them at market price. If it's a large stock dividend, you're going to record it at par. And the reason we're doing this is what I call funny money. Funny money is moving it from one account on your financial statements to another account. No cash involved. You're going to take it from retained earnings and put it into common stock. All right? The journal entry just moves it from one account to another. So whether you're doing it at market or you're doing it at par, it's just a movement from one account to another. You have to have enough stock to do this. This is my favorite one, a stock split. And the only reason I should say that is, in a lot of ways, it's not a lot different than stock dividends, except for you can do this without having stock. A stock split is when you just take the number of pieces in a pie and double them or triple them. So, for example, a 2-for-1 stock split means that everybody that has a share of stock now has 2. Or everyone that has 10 shares of stock now has 20. So that's how I've gotten as many shares of stock as I have with AT&T. Is at the beginning, they gave us 10 shares. And then they gave us another 10 shares. I think at one time we got 40 shares. I can't remember. And then the price got high. Well, AT&T does not want a high stock price. I think the highest it's ever been is 80.
Why don't they want a high stock?
Because they want to maintain a stock that everybody can buy. So they are a utility company. A lot of utility companies stay somewhere around the mid-50s. That's kind of 40 to 50. They want a stock everybody can buy. So when it hit 80, they split. When you split, your stock price cuts in half. So it went from 80 to 40. The number of shares double. So if at the time I had 80 shares, I now have 160 shares. But my price went from 80 to 40. So did the value of my stock change? No. So what's the benefit to me?
You own more of the company.
I what? I own more. No, I don't own any more of the company because everybody's did the exact same thing.
It's a
future,
psychological thing.
In the future, I have the ability because now those 80 shares, I had 40, right? Now I have 80. Those 80 shares, what happens when the stock price goes back up again? Now I have more money. When it went down to 40, I didn't have any more money. But when it got up to 50, I now have $10 per share more on 80 shares instead of 40. And guess what happened? It got back up again, and my 80 shares split, and I have 160. And when I got dividends on 10 shares and 20 shares and then 40 shares, and then they went to 80 because it split, I then got dividends on 80 shares. And then when it split again, I got dividends on 160 shares. Right? So I'm benefiting on dividends, and I benefited because the stock price went up. And then I also do something called reinvesting my dividends, meaning I don't take the cash. So every time I get a dividend, and I don't know what I get, $80 a quarter or something. I put that money back in. Meaning I take the $80 and I buy 2.2 shares of stock. So instead of having 160 shares, I now have 162 shares. Next time they pay dividends the next quarter, I get dividends on 162. And I take that money and now I have 164 point whatever shares. So over time, I can't even tell you how many shares I have because it just keeps taking my dividends and reinvesting them. Because right now, I don't need my AT&T stock dividends because I figure if you get $80 every quarter, what are you going to spend that $80 on? But if I reinvest it and then it's there when I retire, that $80 or $360 a year is going to buy me 9+ shares every year, right? Those 9 shares every year are going to gain dividends. Reinvested, added on, are going to add me more and more dividends.
So the split is good for dividends?
It's good for dividends and it's good for the price because now if I decide to sell, I have more shares to sell at hopefully a higher price.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Isn't there a reverse split too? It's like the opposite.
Yeah, that's not good as well, right? But you can have a 2-for-1, you can have a 3-for-1. Now the par value and everything, doesn't change, but the market price does. So here's an example. So the par value goes in half and the double the shares. So look at what happens to stockholders' equity. Nothing. So the company doesn't have anything happen to them. But down the road, when they're paying out more dividends, stock price goes up. It's a great way to reward your shareholders. And it's a great way to reduce the market price, right? And that's one of the main reasons they do it. So let's look at all of these compared to each other. So stockholders' equity before we do anything, right? $1 million, par value is a penny, common stock, additional paid-in capital, retained earnings. If we do a 2-for-1 stock split, we now have 2 million shares of stock at a par of a half of a cent, nothing changes. But now we have 2 million shares of stock out there at a half of a penny, a half of a cent. If we did 100% stock dividend, we have 2 million shares at a penny. Notice our common stock is now worth 20 million and our retained earnings went down by 10. So that's my funny money I told you about. We moved it from retained earnings to common stock. So common stock went up, retained earnings went down. So the disadvantage of this is we did lose $10 million out of our retained earnings. And then a cash dividend is the only one that actually takes money out of retained earnings and takes it out of stockholders' equity because we're spending cash. But it has no effect on number of shares.
What's the difference between a cash dividend? I know what a stock dividend is.
Cash dividend, because we're literally taking out retained earnings and we're spending cash. So you can only do a cash dividend if you have cash.
Okay.
Now, which one do you think people want? Cash dividend, right? Because if I were retired, am I going to reinvest my dividends or am I going to take my cash dividend? Yeah, all right. And that's most of the people that we do taxes for in the VITA program, they're taking their cash dividends. All right, they're taking that, it's not $90 anymore, but they're taking their $300 or $400 a quarter and they're using that to supplement their income. And now they're getting $1,000 a year from their different variety. Now, the way you and I live, and I am including you in that, even though different generation, but we're expecting that your generation will not live off dividends the way the generation in front of me does. And my grandparents did. And I'm guessing my parents, even though I can't say for sure, but my grandma's generation, they lived off dividends. They have numerous stocks, and those stocks each brought in. I mean, there's people that we do their taxes for that will come in with 10 different stocks with $1,000 from each stock over the year. So they have $10,000 coming in from various stocks. People don't have that same thing because now it's more mutual funds. And then they're taking the gain from the mutual fund and they're just taking the interest from that as they retire, not necessarily the dividends from that as they retire. Different way of investing now. Okay, so now we have preferred stock, but let me see right here. I think we're going to, let's do some journal entries. So let's talk about preferred stock now. So preferred stock is different than common stock. Not every company has preferred stock. Preferred stock is going to be issued by the SEC, just like the common stock. You're going to go to the SEC and you're going to be authorized to sell preferred stock. It's going to be listed separately. And I don't know if you remember from last week, but when I showed you a balance sheet, it actually said preferred stock on it and it said common stock on it. So it would be listed completely separate. It will say the words preferred stock. You're usually going to sell preferred stock at a higher price than common stock. Some things that are typically, they have different voting rights. Now this has been clarified in the old book, the old edition, it actually said no voting rights. There are some preferred stocks that you do get to vote. A lot of preferred stocks, there are no voting rights. It depends on the stock. All right, preferred stock has what's called a fixed dividend rate, meaning you are usually guaranteed a dividend. Now, what kind of dividend? It depends on the type of preferred stock. All right, but you are guaranteed. Now, we talked about common stock. There's no guarantee of a dividend. All right? But preferred stock, that's what you're paying for. And you do have priority over common stock, meaning your stock's here when it comes to dividends, and if there are other payouts, and common stock's down here.
Like if the company goes bankrupt?
Yeah, in payout, right, if there's anything paid out, yeah.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the journal entry, you'll be happy to know there is no difference in the journal entry. The only difference in the journal entry is the word preferred stock versus common stock. That's it. You do cash, you do preferred stock, you do additional paid-in capital. The only reason you guys get this one wrong on the test is because you put the word common stock instead of preferred stock. Or you put CS instead of PS. And I will count it wrong. You have to make sure you put the word preferred stock, not common stock, if I'm asking for a preferred stock journal entry. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. You record preferred stock at par, and the rest goes to additional paid-in capital. All right. So this one is going on. It says National Beverage redeemed 120,000 shares of its $1 preferred stock for $6 million. All right. What they're talking about there is they bought it back. All right. They redeemed the stock. They bought it back. So what happens? Preferred stock, additional paid-in capital, and cash. Same thing, but it stays preferred stock. It's not treasury stock. It's bought back in. Okay, it can be reacquired. All right, it's called a redemption rather than treasury stock because it's basically being retired and it's not going to be reissued. All right, it's not given back to the shareholders, so it's not put into what's called treasury stock. So it's slightly different than when we do common stock when we buy it back. It's just redeemed like that, and then it's retired. They buy it back and they retire it. So let's talk about the dividends. That is the big change. There are two types of dividends for preferred stock. There's something called current preferred dividends and cumulative preferred dividends. Current dividends mean that every year a company pays dividends, you get one. And you get it before the common stock. All right, that's just common sense. Every year a company pays dividends, you get it, and you get it before the common stock. Cumulative preferred means you get a dividend every year even if the company doesn't pay one. Well, that might not make a lot of sense. So what that means is if they don't pay one, they owe you one. So every year they owe you a dividend. And if they don't pay a dividend, they owe you it. And they owe you a dividend for every year they don't pay one. And it keeps accumulating and accumulating until they pay one. And then when they pay one, they have to pay you for every back year. And they have to pay you for every back year before they can pay any current stockholders.
So that's the best for the...
That's for the cumulative preferred. And those dividends that they owe you are called dividends in arrears, dividends from behind. So the first thing you got to look at when you're doing a preferred dividend is figuring out, is it current or is it cumulative? And it will say either cumulative or dividends in arrears. If it says the stock has dividends in arrears, that means it's cumulative. You can't have dividends in arrears and not be cumulative. So then the next question you have to ask yourself is, how do you figure out what the dividends are? So I'm gonna show you that. Right here is how stocks are shown. And we'll look at a balance sheet again. But preferred stock is listed as preferred stock outstanding 6%, $20 par, 2,000 shares. Underneath it, it will say common stock outstanding $10 par, 5,000 shares outstanding. The key thing that you want to pay attention to is this. The preferred stock says 6%, $20 par, 2,000 shares. Right? That's what you want to pay attention to. The way you calculate how much they have to pay is you take 6% times par times the number of shares. So 6% times 20 times 2,000 6% times 20 times 2,000 is 2,400. That means that every year, depending on the type of stock this is, they have to pay a $2,400 dividend to preferred stock. So let's read it. It said, assume the preferred stock of Flavor, I can never say it, carries only a current dividend. So what does that mean?
It's not the other one.
It's not the what?
It's not the one where you get paid every, like, you keep track.
Right. So they only get paid a dividend if a dividend is actually issued. All right. So they get paid $2,400 when a dividend is actually issued. All right. And the company declares dividends totaling $8,000 in 2018 and $10,000 in 2019. So it says how much would the common stock and the preferred stock get? So 2018, 2019, $8,000 and $10,000. So you got preferred stock and you got common stock. Well, we just figured out that preferred stock gets $2,400. So in 2018 they get $2,400. That means there is how much left for common stock? $5,600. In 2019 they get $2,400. So that means that in 2019 common stocks gets $7,600. So preferred stock gets $2,400 every year that they issue a dividend. And they issued a dividend in 18 and 19. So the key that you got to remember is how to come up with this dividend. So number of shares times par times percent. And then is it cumulative or is it current? And this one was current. So now let's change it and say that they did not, it is a cumulative dividend. And they did not issue a dividend, but they said it's in arrears for 16 and 17. How would that change my numbers up here? This one's current. We're going to make it be cumulative. How would I change it? What does dividends and arrears mean?
You get dividends from the past.
Okay. So what year am I going to get dividends from the past? 16 and 17. What year are they going to be paid in?
18.
Okay. So in 18, how much am I going to get paid?
You should just
Okay? So if I add 2,400, that's 4,800. So that would pay me for
2 years.
2 years. But how many years do they owe me?
3. I thought it was 2 years.
Well, they owe me for 16 and 17. That's 2. But they also owe me for 18. So instead of 2,400, 4,800, it's going to be,
You had 3 times.
right. Am I doing the right math? Is it 7,200? I think so.
So you don't include 2019?
2019 gets paid in 2019.
Okay.
So 2019 you multiplied by 4.
No, because in 2019, I then paid them for 16 and 17.
So it goes back to 0. Or
Yes. Yeah. So I owe them 2,400 times 3.
That's kind of true.
And then how much is left for the common stock? How about 800? Okay. All right, so I owe them for $4,800 in arrears, $2,400 regular, so I owe them $7,200 for preferred stock, $800 for common stock, and it does not change for 2019
Because you paid it. Just go.
because it goes back to 0. Yep. All right, but you got to get that. So it makes a big difference to the common stock people. So think about what I've talked about to you guys for 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, when the stock market was not doing well. All right, the stock market took a big hit. In some cases, now I didn't look at my AT&T stock because I didn't want to. All right, so that was my way of dealing with it. But I can tell you that, like, the little bit that we had in my kids' college fund cut in half. And people that were getting close to retirement, like my dad, well, my dad was retired, some of their funds were cut in half. I mean, it hit people hard. Now, I can tell you my kids got back up to normal, but what happened was the money that you lost during that time, building on what you did have is what you lost, right? So even though the market got back to where it was, what did you lose in that time frame? So think about the people that got dividends. Nobody got dividends for AT&T still paid it. But for those companies that didn't pay dividends, for those people that had preferred stock, think about the big payout they got when they did get paid. And think about how the common stock people probably got killed. So sometimes it does pay to have preferred stock. I don't own any preferred stock. But that would be a good example of when it might pay off to have preferred stock.
Do you have to have connections to?
No, you can buy preferred stock. You can go on the market and buy preferred stock for any company that has preferred stock.
Is it more expensive?
Yes. Yep. And one of the reasons is this. You get usually better dividends, and you get preference in the dividends, and you have preference in voting rights.
So the difference between like the current and cumulative is so the percent times par times shares is all the same.
Yes.
The difference with the cumulative is that it's also times years old.
Times the years old. You get paid for every year, regardless of whether they pay.
So the only difference is you had years owed.
Right. If they owe you years. Yep.
Okay.
All right. So we know what retained earnings is, hopefully. There's a copy of retained earnings. Now, can you have a loss in retained earnings? So can this actually be true for Baker? Yes. Because look at their stockholders' equity. Is their stockholders' equity still okay? They still have $780 possibly $1 million in their equity. And it's okay because of their large additional paid-in capital. Can you continue to run at a deficit for retained earnings?
Yeah.
Not for very long, all right? Because what is retained earnings?
Stop.
No, stock's by itself. Retained earnings is beginning retained earnings plus net income. So if retained earnings continues to be a deficit, that means you are not making any money. So at some point, it's not going to work. Because, yeah, retained earning, additional paid-in capital is keeping you afloat, but that means you're continuing to sell stock. You're not going to be continuing to sell stock if your retained earnings is continuing to be a deficit. So that is not going to continue to work. All right, this is what your statement of stockholders' equity looked like. Remember when you did your annual report and you took a look and you did your trial balance? Remember how it looked different? And one of the reasons is companies can look at each of these items individually and look at them for a year and then see all of the years in a row. Remember when you looked at you guys didn't look at it very long because you didn't have to, but if you looked at your statement of stockholders' equity, here was your retained earnings. And you guys had to go get your dividends from your statement of stockholders' equity. And all you guys had to look at was this retained earnings column, but the other columns that were on there, your preferred stock if you had any, your common stock, your additional paid-in capital, your treasury stock, and then if you had any other accumulated losses or gains. So it doesn't look like how we do it. When we do it in our simplified, we just say common stock retained earnings. In a true statement of stockholders' equity, they break it out. Because investors want to know each one of those things. They want to know how much preferred stock you have, how much common stock, how much treasury stock. All right, so this time we have 3 ratios. You should know all 3 ratios because you just turned in, and they're graded. If you didn't look, they're graded. And one of you, I can't remember who it was, turned in the wrong thing. So you need to look, and it was not
How will
him.
you know if you turn it wrong way?
Because you got a 0.
Oh.
Okay. So you need to talk to me. You turned in your trial balance. You did not turn in ratios. So I'm hoping that means you just attached the wrong thing.
That was me.
Okay, so we know who it was, so the rest of you don't need to look. Okay.
I did it though.
You did. That's why I was hoping you did it, and it just attached the wrong thing. Okay. So you just need to reattach it.
So what did it show up?
The only thing that showed up was the trial balance. Nothing else showed up. But you can go out there and attach the rest of it.
Does it have anything to do with being like an Apple product or like?
Of doing what?
Does it matter if it was in like not the Excel but the Apple version? Is that why it's in?
It could, but I saw the trial balance. Try emailing it to me.
Email?
Try it, yeah.
Will I still get my extra credit for turning early?
You had the date. Just don't open it, and I'll be able to see the date on the thing. So you had the date right. Huh?
What trial balance?
The one that you guys did like 4 weeks ago, that's what he submitted.
Oh.
The original one, yeah. That's why I was like, I'm hoping someone just attached the wrong spreadsheet. Okay, so you did these 3. Earnings per share is the most widely watched ratio in the world. All right? That's because it can tell you what, now if you look at the slides at all, probably one of the most commonly missed things, especially for the online students. I graded 2 classes. Even though I encouraged you guys to turn them in early, I still only got 2 classes graded over the last week. But mostly for the online students, the definitions or explanations were missed the most. But earnings per share is how much you're making per share. How much, usually $1 or several dollars you're making per share. So you're taking net income divided by the number of common shares outstanding. Were there any preferred dividends? No. Just because a ratio asks for something doesn't mean that there has to be something. A lot of people, and I don't think in this class, but a lot of people tried to make there be preferred dividends. Some people were very smart and emailed me and said, I can't find any preferred dividends. Is this right? And I'm like, yes, it is right. There are no preferred dividends. The other problem, which many of you guys still had, was you didn't average. Whether it was this or any of the other ones, instead of taking average inventory or average stockholders' equity or average common shares, you gave me beginning. So that was another mistake. So for National Beverage, you had 6.2, preferred dividends was 20 million. So in the end, earnings per share was 1.31. Is that good? $1.31 per share. It's not great, but does it depend? Yeah. Depends on how much you're spending per share of stock, right? If you're spending $200 per share, is that a good earnings per share? I'd want it to be higher.
$2 is better than the $1.31.
$2 is better than the $1.31, right? But if I was spending $10 per share and I was earning $1.31, would that be good? Yes. So a lot of it depends on what else you're doing. So let's look at the next one, return on equity. All right. This is the amount earned for each dollar invested. All right. So how much you're making for each dollar invested for the shareholders. So net income, again, minus preferred dividends divided by average stockholders' equity. Return on equity was 34%. I had some people telling me that the return on equity wasn't good when it was in the 30s, and I would tend to differ with that opinion, because a 34% return on equity is, I would not argue with.
It's like for every dollar you spend, you're getting.
Roughly 34% return on your money, yeah. Right. This definition was not very well responded overall. And again, I can't tell you the difference between the two classes, but this is the value investors put on your stock. So this tells you what investors think. So the investors are looking at the stock price based on the earnings per share. And this is kind of what I was saying, based on your earnings per share. It depends on how much you're paying per the stock. Oof, there we go. So $61 and you're earning $1.31. They're putting a pretty good value on that stock. Now, does anybody know who National Beverage is? I'll show you in a minute. All right, so let's look at a couple of these. These are tiny. Okay. So, they give you some financial, I can't talk numbers up here. Notice the net income. Look at the size of National Beverage compared to Pepsi. National Beverage is drastically bigger, but you guys don't know who they are. Pepsi made $6.3 billion in 2016. National Beverage made $61 billion.
It says a million.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're right. That should not be the case. National Beverage is smaller. You're right. They switched. They should always be expressed in the same, and they aren't. So that should, yeah. Okay. So Pepsi is billions, National Beverage is millions. All right. So when you look at these numbers now does this matter? Does the numbers matter? That one's in billions and one's in millions?
Yeah.
And when you look at ratios, does it? No. The ratios takes the size out of the equation. That's what makes it nice. All right. So Pepsi's making $4.38 earnings per share. National Beverage is making $1.31. Which one looks better? Pepsi. All right. Return on equity is 54%. It's gone up drastically for Pepsi. National Beverage was 38. It's gone down to 34. Which one looks better? Pepsi. And the PE ratio was 26. It's gone down to 24. Was 22. It's gone up to 47. Which one of those looks better? National Beverage. Why do you think that is? Because why?
The increase was bigger between the 2 years.
Well, that's not why this increased more, but why do you think it's 47 versus 24?
Higher stock price.
Yeah, the stock price here is $105. It was 98, it's gone up a little bit. You can buy one share for $105. You can buy one share for 62. So they're saying you can get more shares of National Beverage. I can tell you, since the new books come out, National Beverage has gone down, Pepsi has gone up. These were flipped before. The only thing that stayed the same is this. Right here, they've changed. Because National Beverage, they used to be in the 50s. These used to be comparable. These were the same. This was the only place Pepsi was better, was the earnings per share. So let me show you who